The Neo Geo is a legendary arcade console and cabinet that took the late 80s and early 90s by storm. It introduced the next level of gaming experience at a time where the arcade experience could not 100% be replicated at home. It offered intense graphics, sound, and true innovation in the home and commercial market. But with everything that the Neo Geo was and offered, why did it eventually decrease in prominence in the gaming market in the early 2000s? Or did it? So let's go back in time and take a look at the MVS and AES Neo Geo systems, their total rise to dominance, their competition, and where they stand today. So SNK started out back in 1978. During the 80s, SNK made a host of hit arcade games, games such as Ikari Warriors, that took two unknown characters at the time and had them play in an over-the-top view by manually rotating the special joystick that was made with the machine. And after the success of Ikari Warriors, SNK doubled down with the sequel that was even a bigger hit, Victory Road, which followed the same configuration and control scheme as Ikari Warriors, but offered a much more polished and beautiful gaming experience. Brighter colors, bigger enemies, and more weapons. Another successful game in SNK's library that they released at the time in the arcades was Prisoners of War, also known as POW. This game was a huge step up in graphics and gameplay. It offered a two-player co-op mode that takes you through multiple stages of defeating enemies, picking up weapons, with this over-the-top animation of characters literally flying off the screen. The game is considered difficult by some, however the gameplay was so intense and fun that people kept putting those quarters in. SNK also made a host of other games like sports games, puzzle games, and also made more toned-down games like Psycho Soldiers. But the key thing to remember here is, all these characters in all these games, Ikari Warriors, Athena, SNK branded these characters into our name if you played arcade machines, which they would later capitalize on in the future. And some of these wildly popular games also made it onto the home console platform, and were very successful there as well. So if you didn't play these popular games in the arcade, you did get to play them at home on the consoles, mainly the NES. And while they were lesser versions of the game, they still were fun and brought their own unique flair to the table. One example of this is POW Prisoners of War. In the arcade, there were two players. Obviously, the arcade had better graphics and sound, but for what the NES version was, it did offer longer gameplay, unique stages, and still kept the theme of the original POW arcade version. But the downside with the NES version was it was only one player. But other games that ported from the arcade like Victory Road and Ikari Warriors did offer two players. And to be fair, if you look at the comparison between Ikari Warriors arcade and Ikari Warriors for the NES, for what it was, I think it was a pretty good translation. So with SNK having brand familiarity on the NES and the arcade, it proved that they were capable of making successful games. So during that time in the late 80s, the 8-bit era was coming to an end, and Sega was knocking on the door of a next generation console release, the Sega Genesis, that would introduce true 16-bit gaming, with the NES still skating by on the NES, but still having their next 16-bit generation system in development. So in the gaming market, normally when a new system comes out, it's much more powerful than its predecessor. So SNK, seeing that there is a market for home console gaming, they actually did the unthinkable. They developed a whole new arcade system with the Neo Geo MVS and the Neo Geo AES. This was a true innovation in the arcade market at the time, because the Neo Geo MVS could run multiple games without the arcade owner having to buy new software or equipment for a current machine. All the arcade owners had to do was just buy new Neo Geo games. So ultimately, the Neo Geo could run sometimes 2 games, 4 games, or even 6 games in their arcade machine, bringing in more money, less maintenance, and all off one machine. So on the home console front, with the release of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Genesis, SNK felt there was room for a home market version of the Neo Geo MVS. And with that came the Neo Geo AES. Now MVS stands for Multi-Video System. This was a system that ran in the arcade machines. The home version was the AES system, which stands for Advanced Entertainment System. Essentially, it was the same games playing on both platforms And the MVS machine actually had a memory card slot where you could take a Neo Geo memory card, put it into the MVS system. Wherever you left off in the arcade, you could save your game and then bring it home if you had the same game at home on your AES system. So it was a true one-to-one arcade experience, and there was nothing like it on the market at the time. However, the standard consumers consoles like the TurboGrafx 16, Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and the Genesis were made to be affordable to the home market, but the Neo Geo AES system went a whole other direction by offering a high-end arcade experience, but it came at a hefty price. In the US, the console's debut price was planned to be $599 US, and it would include 2 joystick controllers, a game, which was either Baseball Stars Professional or NOM 75. However, the price was raised and its American launch debuted as the Gold system at $649, which is about $1,500 today's money. Not to mention each game was about $200 or more. As far as systems go, that was doubling the price of a consumer marketed system. And as far as each cartridge, it was 4 times the amount of the standard home consumer game. So this made the console only accessible to those who had expendable income. But SNK wasn't really so much trying to compete with the Super Nintendo or the Genesis. Their main goal was to bring the arcade home, and that's exactly what they did. And we can see that in comparison from the actual Neo Geo machine running the same game that the Super Nintendo was running. The graphics, sound, big sprites, bright colors that is offered by the Neo Geo system is unmatched. While graphics and gameplay performance were clearly obvious, they still had to justify that price. So the marketing team at SNK came out with some interesting advertisements. The infamous wiener and hot dog comparison, the picture with the lady in the lingerie and her man playing the game, and the whole idea of being the big dog. Go big or go home. I remember when I graduated high school when the Neo Geo came out, and I played Samurai Showdown at the arcade. I was hooked on that game, and I wanted that game so bad. So I bought the Super Nintendo port of the game, but with the orange blood that came out of the characters, the dumbed down music, the terrible voiceovers, I couldn't go back to playing that after I played the actual arcade version of it. So I was a manager at Shakey's Pizza and Buffet, and I decided to get a job working midnights as an overnight dishwasher. This is a true story. And my whole plan was to save enough money with both jobs to get that Neo Geo machine. And all I really accomplished was overworking myself and falling asleep at my second job. No Neo Geo, no good time, and I actually wouldn't get a Neo Geo machine until the mid-90s when I had a grown-up job. But that's how bad I wanted one. And a lot of people felt the same way. It was just so friggin' expensive at the time. But even with the price, one of the things that helped the Neo Geo was the rebirth of the arcades with Street Fighter II. Street Fighter II was wildly successful at that time in the 90s and launched the catalyst of Neo Geo imitation games that were highly successful in their own right. One of these games being The Art of Fighting, Fatal Fury, and so forth, and ultimately led to a saturation of fighting games. But the higher name ones like the King of Fighters and Street Fighter's many iterations had brand recognition and credibility. But even with all the Neo Geo's arcade success, other endeavors did hinder the Neo Geo brand. So in an attempt to close the gap with the price and the marketing for the home console, because let's be real, $649 was just too expensive for the average gamer, they came out with the Neo Geo CD. Now the Neo Geo CD was a less expensive version of the Neo Geo that ran CD-based games, and instead of the AES fight sticks that you got, you were reduced to a controller with 4 buttons. With the Neo Geo CD running on CDs, the major problem with that was, while you did get better audio, you got horrible loading times. Probably the worst in its class at that time. The Neo Geo CD ran a single speed drive that was horrendously slow, especially when compared to the PlayStation 1 and Saturn's double speed drives. With that said though, the Neo Geo CD did do exceptionally well in Japan by selling 25,000 units on its day one launch, but the same thing unfortunately couldn't be said about its launch in the US. That thing just tanked. So at this point, Neo Geo was only making money primarily from the arcades. But even with successful arcade games, the technology of the Neo Geo, with having a 2D sprite capability, some of the newer games offered 3D graphics, as seen with Virtua Fighter and Tekken. With 3D graphics becoming the norm in the arcade industry, the Neo Geo's 2D hardware was unable to replicate that. But even with that, the Neo Geo's library was so strong and the games were so beloved, it still maintained profitability during the 90s. However, with the steady decline of the arcade in the 90s due to the console popularity of the PlayStation 1 and Saturn that offered sometimes a better experience to the true arcade counterpart with true CD music tracks and more options than the arcade offered, the failure of the Neo Geo CD in the US, and just to mention, while not an arcade system, the Neo Geo Pocket's failure left SNK in a state where it was literally hemorrhaging money at that point. And at that time, that was pretty much the end of the Neo Geo AES and MVS systems, and the company got sold to a pachinko company, of all things, which was short-lived, and soon the pachinko company bankrupted SNK altogether. But SNK did live on, and was rebranded as Playmore and purchased the IP properties of the original SNK, and the rest is history. SNK lives on to this day, and that's a story for another time. So what's the climate like in today's world for the Neo Geo AES and MVS arcade system? Well, I'd say they are alive and well. Neo Geo AES consoles and MVS cabinets are still high in demand and very collectible. Some Neo Geo games can go as low as $50, others can go as high as $500, just depends on who you want to sell to. And yes, they have replicas of the Neo Geo 161 cart, which is a great cart. However, there are some true collectors out there that will only accept an authentic AES MVS cartridge in their arcade machines. Imitations just aren't good enough. Those cartridges, systems, and arcade cabinets command a premium price and a ton of respect. Even in more modern times, Unico even released a highly successful bar-top Neo Geo replica, the Neo Geo MVSX, that came with 6 buttons as opposed to 4. More than likely because they know just how passionate the community is and will find a way to mod that machine. So that's going to do it for the Neo Geo arcade machine. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making it. Neo Geo is definitely one of my favorite consoles ever made. The arcade cabinets are just beautiful cabinets. My dream machine would be a Neo Geo Big Red, preferably a 6, but I would settle for a 4. Hell, I'd even settle for just a 2 slot. Neo Geo machines are just cool. On a side note, I don't know how true this is, but I heard Unico might be making something like that. Maybe a 4 slot or something. But that's just a rumor, so let's hope it's true. And with that, guys, please let me know in the comments if you were actually one of the lucky people that actually got their hands on a Neo Geo AES machine back in the early 90s. If you're still out there looking for one and you want to pay that premium price that the community commands, or if you're like most people and you're just okay with good old-fashioned emulation. As always, guys, a like and subscription is always welcome, and be sure to smash that notification bell so you don't miss any arcade related information on this channel. And with that, guys, take care of yourself, protect your inner peace, God bless you, and we'll catch you on the next one.